UFC Fight Night, Perez versus Taira from the UFC Apex this Saturday night, of course, in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, you may be wondering why, again, we are dressed up for a special occasion. It's because this is the 100th card in the UFC Apex, 100 of them, and this isn't the last one. You'd think, oh, maybe after 100 Apex cards, this would be it. No, there's still another one. I believe July 20th is the date, if I'm not mistaken. It's sometime around there in July. Maybe that one will be the last one in the Apex. Actually, no, there's one scheduled for August 10th as well. So the Apex will never die. There will be at least 102 cards in the Apex, but this one is Apex 100, Perez versus Taira. I can't believe we're here. But folks, if you haven't yet, though, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for some more UFC picks here on the channel. We do one of these predictions videos every single week for every single UFC card. Additionally, we do PFL, Bellator, every other big MMA promotion here on the channel as well. So tomorrow, we will have our PFL regular season episode number 4, season event number 4. We've got the heavyweights and the women's flyweights. In the main event, you've got Valentin Moldavsky and Linton Vassell, the trilogy bout. And then the co-main event, Dakota Chiva is going to go in there and absolutely obliterate Chelsea Hackett. But that's going to happen tomorrow. That card is on Thursday, and we will have our predictions out for that video tomorrow night. So let's get into the first of 13 fights here on this UFC card in the Apex, and we start things off here with Costa taking on Nuerdanbieke. Now, I find this fight a little bit interesting, because Costa is a favorite against a guy in Nuerdanbieke who has had 50 professional fights. Yes, the Chinese fighter has had 50 professional fights at 30 years of age. This will be walk number 51 for him into the octagon, or into a professional mixed martial arts cage. He is currently 3-2 in the UFC, with his first fight in the promotion being a loss to Joshua Kalibau, and then his last fight being a TKO loss to Steve Garcia. He gets dropped with a body shot, and Garcia ends up winning the fight in the second round. The wins in the UFC are Sean Soriano, TJ Brown, and Derek Minner, who'll be taking on Costa, who is 1-1, who has a loss to Steve Garcia as well in his last fight, and then before that, a win over Austin Lingo. His first fight in the UFC was a loss to Thiago Moises on short notice. It felt, again, like a tough fight for him in Brazil. Moises submitted him in the second round. Now we get Nuerdanbieke and Costa. Now, where does Costa really shine? It's going to mostly be on the ground. Yes, he is able to do some work on the feet too, but Costa, I would say, is best with his jiu-jitsu. Yes, he has shown, some improvements with his striking, but a lot of his offense gets going. It is, kind of based around the work that he does do on the ground. And for Nuerdanbieke, this is a fighter, again, who is very well balanced. He can get it done on the feet, and he can get it done on the ground as well. Nuerdanbieke has got a lot of power in his strikes. You saw that in the Derek Minner fight. Now, did Derek Minner throw the fight? I don't know. That one was really weird back in November of 2022. But Nuerdanbieke, in each of his last 3 fights, has been able to knock down his opponent. Even in the loss to Steve Garcia, he was able to get a knockdown. Same thing can be said in his knockout victory over Derek Minner and the decision victory over TJ Brown back in June of 2022 as well. So Nuerdanbieke has got the power. Yes, he's able to wrestle, but in a fight against Costa, I really don't think that is the best pathway to victory for him. So I think, again, for this fight, you are going to see Nuerdanbieke try to keep the fight on the feet, and for Costa, it's going to be trying to get the fight down to the ground. With all that being said, I'm actually going to take the underdog here in our first fight. I do like the matchup for Nuerdanbieke. I do understand he isn't the best with his takedown defense, and there's a definite chance Costa is able to get him down, and Costa is able to, either get a submission or just kind of lay on him. I understand that as a possibility, but also in the feet, I really do like what Nuerdanbieke is able to do. He hits hard, and he throws hard, too. I think it is going to sway the fight in his favor, and I'm going to go with a Nuerdanbieke finish in the first fight of this card. I'm going to take Nuerdanbieke to start off UFC Apex number 100 by second round TKO. Now, the UFC is probably not even going to acknowledge the fact that this is the 100th card in the Apex, but I'm going to, because it is a big deal. Because, we've had some great moments in the Apex, and, they keep on happening. But we're going to take Nuerdanbieke to win the opener by second round TKO. Again, I just think the power is going to be big in this fight. I am a little bit concerned about his defensive wrestling. I'm not going to lie to you, but I'm still going to take Nuerdanbieke to win the fight, and we're taking him by second round TKO. To our next fight, Josephine Knutsson taking on Julia Polastri in this fight. Both these fighters are coming off wins on the Contender Series. For Josephine Knutsson, getting her contract back in 2023, and then her last fight beating Marnik Mann by unanimous decision. Now, we've talked about Marnik Mann on the channel. She's not that good. Knutsson beat her on the Mexican Independence Day card. She beat her by unanimous decision. You look at the significant strike count. I mean, Knutsson outstrikes her 81-8 in that fight. Control time at 10 minutes to 30 seconds. Comparison in favor, again, of Knutsson. She was able to just go in there and dominate that fight. Taking on Julia Polastri in this fight, who's coming off a win again on the Contender Series by rear naked choke. She was booked against Knutsson earlier this year on the Rosenstruik-Gaziev card. Knutsson pulled out. Then she was booked against Stephanie Luciano. Luciano pulled out due to an illness. And now Polastri finally making her UFC debut against her originally scheduled opponent back in March in Knutsson. We'll see how this fight goes, because Polastri, again, one of these fighters, I would say a little bit similar to a Melt Costa in the fact that she, again, is going to get her offense going with her grappling. That is going to be the main thing that is going to propel her to victory. For Josephine Knutsson, this is a fighter who can do it all as well, but another fighter who I like the offensive wrestling game out of. Again, we saw that in the Marnik Man fight. She was able to be the aggressor in that fight, and she was able to really just keep things going and, you know, was able to beat Marnik Man essentially just because of her wrestling, because of that top control time that she did have, just because, again, she was not able to, or Marnik Man wasn't allowed to really get anything going because of the, you know, death grip to a certain extent that Knutsson had on her throughout that entire fight. And I would, again, I think it would be stupid not to pick her in this spot against Polastri, because I'm not concerned about Julia Polastri throwing anything up off her back. I don't think that is all that, I don't think that's all that likely. I think Knutsson's, again, offensive wrestling game is going to be enough to kind of just, I don't want to say lay on her, because Knutsson is active on top as well, like you saw in the Marnik Man fight, but I think it's going to be a somewhat controlling and a dominant fight for Josephine Knutsson in this one. I don't think, again, Polastri is able to really get anything going in this fight, because, again, I think she is going to be somewhat neutralized because of the game of Knutsson and kind of how Knutsson fights in general. Again, it is somewhat of an overwhelming pace. Again, what she did on the Contender Series, it was more of a striking fight. Again, she did... you know, there were wrestling moments in that fight out of Knutsson, especially in the first round, and she was able to clinch up a lot in the second and the third, but there was more striking than some of her other fights. But again, Knutsson won every single round in that fight. It's just, it is a style of fight that can really shut down your opponent, and that's how Josephine Knutsson fights, and I think she's going to go out there and beat Julia Polastri by decision. So that's the pick for that one. Let's now move on to the featherweight division. We've got Jekka taking on Weston Wilson. I don't think Weston Wilson's very good. I'm going to straight up just say it. Again, there's a reason he is one of the bigger underdogs on this card. Now, the biggest underdog on this card is going to come in the co-main event. We're going to talk about Antonio Trocoli again in the co-main event. I feel like I talk about Antonio Trocoli a lot because he's been booked a million times and never actually fought. But anyways, Weston Wilson is one of the bigger underdogs on this card, and I understand it. He's 0-2 in the UFC, and he's lost by first-round knockout in both of his first two fights. The first one being to Joanderson Brithu, who's a good fighter, and then losing to John Silva in his next one by first-round knockout as well. He now gets the fighter coming out of Indonesia in Jekka Saragih. This guy is 1-1 in the UFC. Now, the first loss to Anshel Jubli isn't the greatest, considering Jubilee just lost to Mike Breeden. And now Breeden's not in the UFC either, but it's just, looking back on it, it's not the best, you know, loss. And then Jekka after that beat Lucas Alexander, who, again, he beats him by first round knockout. Is Lucas Alexander the best guy? No, he's got a win over Stephen Ocho Peterson in the UFC, and that's about it. But he, again, at least he went out there and knocked out Alexander in the first round. And again, everything in this fight kind of points to Jekka winning it by first round knockout. This is why. Weston Wilson's 35 years old. He fights, again, out of Upstate Karate in Simpsonville, South Carolina with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He has that karate type game, but he's not Stephen Thompson. He doesn't have the karate skills that Wonderboy has, and he doesn't have the chin Wonderboy has either. He can't really take a punch, and that's what's happened to him in his first couple fights in the UFC. And now you're taking on a guy in Jekka who is going to be willing to blitz you early in the fight. Look what he did in the Road to the UFC series, and what he did even before he got the shot on Road to UFC as well. Again, 2 knockout victories in Road to UFC before losing to Jubilee in the finals. He won on his fight before Road to UFC by second round knockout as well. It has been, again, just a fast-paced style out of Jekka where he looks to get his opponents out of there as quickly as possible. And again, I feel like that's what's going to happen in this fight too. I don't think Weston Wilson stands much of a chance. I wasn't too impressed with this guy outside of the UFC either. You look at a couple fights ago before he got the call in the UFC in 2022, he loses to Teruto Ishihara over an ex-MMA by knockout in the first round. And then he comes back, he wins a couple fights, but against guys who are 9-20, 4-3, 8-5, and then he gets the call against Joanderson Brithu, loses to John Silva as well, and here we are. Again, Weston Wilson's been finished 7 times in his career, 3 by knockout, 4 by submission. He's just not the greatest. I'm just going to be honest with you. I I know why he's in the UFC. It's the Wonder Boy connection, obviously. And if Weston Wilson was ever going to make a run in the UFC, it would be right now. You can't really do it any later than what he did at the age of 34. So they gave him his shot. They've given him 2 fights, and he's lost both those fights. And it just feels again like this is going to be the 3rd in a row that sends him out of the UFC. This feels like a very easy pick. Jack got to win this one by first round knockout over Weston Wilson in the featherweight division. As we move on to the women's flyweight division, we have got a 3-1 fighter here in Carly Judice taking on Gabriela Fernandes. Now, both these fighters aren't very good. This is a very typical UFC Apex fight. It just is. You've got a fighter who's 3-1 making their UFC debut, taking on a fighter in Gabriela Fernandes, who's 8-3 training at MMA Masters, but she's 0-2 in the UFC. Needs a win to stay in the promotion, very similar to what Weston Wilson needs on Saturday night as well. However, the difference between Fernandez' opponent and Weston Wilson's opponent is that Weston Wilson's fighting a very, is fighting a very accomplished guy. Again, a guy who is, gone through the regionals and who has fought some guys. Carly Judice is a former boxer, if I'm not mistaken, I think. And she hasn't fought anybody. She's not beat a fighter with a winning record yet in her entire professional mixed martial arts career. That's crazy. You look back at what she's done, and I don't understand the signing. I truly don't. She lost in the Contender Series last year to Ernesta Katakate. Katakate has now made her UFC debut, and she's lost to Dione Barbosa on UFC 301 in Brazil. Okay, why is Judice in the UFC? She lost in the Contender Series. She was 3-0 prior to that, and who did she beat? Let's go through it. She beat Ivana Coleman, who was 1-8. She beat her by a head kick in 17 seconds. Ivana Coleman's now 1-13. Then she beat Tara Pagano, who was 1-3 at the time. Pagano's now 1-4. And then she beat Monica Medina, who was 3-4, who's now 3-5, who just lost to Pearl Gonzalez earlier on this year. What are we doing? Why is she in the UFC? Sure, all of her wins are by first round finish, but that doesn't mean crap when you get into the UFC, and I understand Gabriela Fernandes is 0-2 in the UFC. But this is a fighter who has at least gone and fought in the regionals before. She is a former LFA champion. She's not losing to a fighter like Carly Judice in this fight. That's the simplest way I can put it. Gabriela Fernandes should be able to have this fight any way she wants it. And I'm willing to take a step up and say there's a chance she ends up getting a submission in this fight as well. Now, you look back at what Carly Judice did on the Contender Series. It's a back-and-forth boxing fight against Ernesta Katakate. It is. It is a back-and-forth fight that's a split decision for Katakate that she wins. It's not a bad fight. It's not. But still, you can't give out a contract just because of a good fight in the Contender Series to a fighter who's 3-1, who hasn't beaten a fighter with a winning record yet in her professional mixed martial arts career. Now, it's interesting because Judice is the one that is trying to mix things up with the wrestling in that fight. She's the one engaging in the clinch. So that's why I will, thinking on it now, I will lay off of the submission victory for Gabriela Fernandes in this fight. I do think Judice is accomplished enough and is skilled enough to keep herself from getting finished in this fight. But overall, again, I just don't think she's meant for this spot. I don't think she is. I'm going to take the fighter who is a -230 favorite from Brazil, from MMA Masters. I'm taking Gabriela Fernandes. Now, hopefully, again, she has a better performance than the last fighter we saw in the UFC to come out of MMA Masters. Honestly, the last 2 big-name fighters to come out of MMA Masters, again, I know Nico Price, I believe, trains there as well, and he just won, but whatever. Actually, we're not even going to talk about the Colby fight. I'm looking at Miguel Baeza, man. What were we doing? Miguel Baeza's UFC run is over because of his last performance last night against Punahele Soriano. We're hoping Gabriela Fernandes has a better performance out of the MMA Masters gym over there in South Florida, and I do think she's going to execute. Give me Gabriela Fernandes to win the fight by unanimous decision. As we move on to the bantamweight division, we've got Brady Hiestand taking on Garrett Armfield. This is a very good fight for being this low on the card. It should not be a prelim fight. It shouldn't be. I wouldn't be surprised if this does get moved up to the main card by the end of the week, especially when you have a fight like Lucas Almeida and Timmy Cuamba fighting on the main card on the featured bout before this co-main event. That is ridiculous because you've got 2 very fun fighters here in Hiestand and Armfield going at it, and 2 up-and-coming guys. Armfield, 27 years old. Hiestand, 25 years old. Hiestand 2-1. Armfield 2-1 as well. The winner of this fight is in line, I think, for some big things because you look at the guys both these guys have fought in the UFC and who they beat as well. Brady Hiestand, 2-1. He's coming off, his only loss is a split decision loss in a very close fight for the Ultimate Fighter against Ricky Turcios. Since then, he's beat Fernie Garcia and finished Dana Bakari in his last fight. Had bouts scheduled against Damone Blackshield and Rinya Nakamura. They were both canceled, and now he runs into Garrett Armfield. And for Garrett Armfield, a loss to David Onama on short notice by second round arm triangle choke in a fight that he was a plus 550 underdog in. He comes back, he beats Toshiomi Kazama by knockout in the first round of his next fight, and then he beats Brad Katona in his last one, who Katona, again, just coming off a victory last night over in Louisville, Kentucky. I understand, again, he did not fight the best guy in Jesse Butler, but it is what it is. A win is a win, and Armfield is coming off of another win against Brad Katona. This is a good one, because, again, I feel like both these guys kind of do the same thing very well. They, Armfield is, actually, I take that back. Armfield isn't the wrestler that Hiestand is. Armfield is going to scrap more on the feet than Hiestand will want to. Hiestand is going to go back to his wrestling base, and I think especially in a fight like this, he is going to definitely look to go there. However, I like the defensive wrestling game out of Garrett Armfield. I do. Right? He was able to fight off some takedowns from Brad Katona. That's what Brad Katona does. That's the only thing Brad Katona really does. He was able to fight off a lot of takedowns from Katona. Katona goes 4 for 9 in that fight over in Canada in January at UFC 297. And when the fight's in the field, Armfield, again, wins almost every moment of that fight on the feet. He loses the last round because of the damage that Katona was able to do on the ground. But the first 2 rounds are won by Armfield because, again, of what he's able to do on the feet. You look at what Brady Hiestand's got. Again, I don't think Hiestand's able to beat Armfield in a striking fight. I saw this guy outstruck by Ricky Tercios. He's also dropped by Tercios and Tanab Bakary. And I'm not saying Brady Hiestand's bad at all. I do like Brady Hiestand a lot. I'm just looking at it from a matchup perspective. I think Garrett Armfield is better, and I think he is better in turn because of his striking game. I think that is where Armfield wins this fight. Because I don't think Hiestand's able to have the most success with his grappling. Because, again, I just saw Armfield, fight pretty well against a good wrestler in Brad Katona. Again, Katona's 4-3 in the UFC. He's 14-3 as a professional. Who would I take in a pure wrestling fight, or pure wrestling match? Brad Katona or Brady Hiestand? I'd probably take Brad Katona. So if Garrett Armfield's able to keep the fight standing against Brad Katona, he'll be able to do it against Hiestand as well. Hiestand's striking game may be a little bit better, if we're being honest. It might be. The guy does have a chin on him. That's why I'm not taking Armfield to go out there and get a finish. But when I just look at it again, I feel like it is somewhat of a very similar matchup for Armfield. He does not have to change his style of game for this fight against Hiestand. It is the same exact objective for Garrett Armfield in this fight against Hiestand like he had in January against Katona. And I think Armfield goes out there. I think he stuffs a lot of takedowns and he keeps the fight standing. And when this fight is contested on the feet, Armfield will win because of A, the power he's got, and B, the volume he's able to put on too against Hiestand. I just don't think Hiestand's able to keep up with both of those combined. Give me Garrett Armfield to win the fight. I'm going to take him to win this fight by unanimous decision. Okay, next one. Nate Maness taking on Jimmy Flick. Again, another one of these fights where I would be hard-pressed to not pick Nate Maness in this fight, right? Okay, there's a reason he's a minus 400 favorite in this fight, give or take, depending on what book you look at right now. But Jimmy Flick, okay, he's coming off a win over Malcolm Gordon in Canada. Now, I thought Jimmy Flick was the worst UFC flyweight of all time. But I'm now here to say Malcolm X Gordon is the worst flyweight of all time. Again, the first round's absolutely dominant. Jimmy Flick doesn't land a strike. Malcolm Gordon's on top positioning the entire fight. Second round happens. Malcolm Gordon's dominating. Jimmy Flick gets a takedown, and Jimmy Flick submits him from the half guard with an arm triangle choke, right? After Malcolm Gordon has it in the bag after the first round. So now here we are. Malcolm Gordon is probably, I think he retired from mixed martial arts, but Jimmy Flick buys himself another fight in the UFC. And for as how bad Jimmy Flick has been in his last 2 losses, somehow he's only 2-2 in the UFC. So this doesn't spell the end for Jimmy Flick if he loses. It's just, he was right there. He was, on the edge of being 1-3 in the UFC and likely cut from the promotion after that initial retirement after he beat Cody Durden of all people, who's not that bad. And now here he is finding himself as a big underdog against Nate Maness, because he should be, right? He should be a pretty sizable dog against Maness, who's 4-2 in the UFC with his only losses being to Taira Ulanbekov and Umar Nurmagomedov. Those are tough guys. He's coming off a win in his first fight at flyweight in Mateus Mendoza, winning that fight by first round knockout. Supposed to fight Azat Mascom earlier this year. The fight fell through due to a Maness withdrawal, and now he gets Jimmy Flick. Maness, all he has to do in this fight is keep the fight standing, and he is a decent defensive wrestler, right? You've had guys that have been able to take him down, but they are, again, Umar Nurmagomedov and Taira Ulanbekov. Jimmy Flick is a good jiu-jitsu player. but he struggles with the takedowns like a lot of very good jiu-jitsu guys. I say it all the time, but the examples I use are Brian Ortega and Mackenzie Dern. Why is Aljamain Sterling so successful, and why has Aljamain Sterling been a former champion, one of the greatest bantamweights of all time, if not the greatest bantamweight of all time? It's because he can wrestle, and he wrestles and then uses his jiu-jitsu. Unlike guys like Ortega or fighters like Dern or even someone like Jimmy Flick, who lacks the wrestling but has very good jiu-jitsu. You can't go anywhere in mixed martial arts without wrestling, and unfortunately Jimmy Flick really doesn't have that. Again, he was able to get one takedown against Malcolm Gordon, but it's not the explosive wrestling and the wrestling that's going to be good enough to beat Nate Maness. Maness will be able to win, and he's going to make it look very easy. Maness is going to do what Malcolm Gordon should have done, and he's going to beat Jimmy Flick in the first round by knockout. So that's the first of many flyweight fights on this card, at least in the men's flyweight division, because now we're going to another flyweight fight. Again, Tagir Ulanbekov, who we mentioned earlier, will be taking on Josh Van. Now, I like Joshua Van. I'm done wearing this, so I'm going to take this off. But I like Josh Van. I think he's very good, right? He has had a good run so far in the UFC. This is a tough fight. Now, I would have liked to see Josh Van go out there and fight Tatsuro Taira. That fight was booked for UFC 302 in the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. That would have been the fight. Obviously, they had to rebook some things, with the main event of this card originally being... Who was Alex Perez supposed to fight? It was supposed to be Tagir Ulanbekov. So what happened? I don't know why everything got mixed up. I'll be honest with you. I don't remember off the top of my head. But they rebooked Tagir Ulanbekov against Van instead of Perez. So yeah, they flipped everything, which is kind of weird. So yeah, Ulanbekov was likely going to be in a main event spot against Alex Perez, and instead here he is against Josh Van, which it's a tough fight for Ulanbekov, right? It's a tough fight because he's fighting out of the rankings now. Ulanbekov is a ranked guy taking on an unranked fighter in Josh Van, who's looked very good, right? He's an undefeated guy in the UFC. He's 3-0, wins over Zhalgas Zhumagulov, Kevin Borjas, and Felipe Bunez. All three of them in a row, his last one being in January of this year. He was booked against Lucas Rocha. Rocha pulled out. He's booked against Sumadarji. Sumadarji pulled out. So then that's how he got rescheduled against Tatsuro Taira. But then Tatsuro Taira got rebooked in the main event of this card. So now here he is against Tagir Ulanbekov. I'm a little scared if it's too much, though, because Tagir Ulanbekov is good. But then I do look back at his fight against Tim Elliott, and he did lose that fight. Tim Elliott beat him. Tim Elliott was able to drop him. I don't know. This fight is a lot closer to me than the odds indicate. This is a very close fight on paper. I think it is. Because Josh Van is good. Josh Van is going to go at you for 15 minutes, a hard 15 minutes straight. That's what he's done in all of his last fights. And again, the only fight that didn't go 15 minutes is a fight that he finished against Felipe Bunez earlier this year on that Ankalaev and Johnny Walker card, the rematch, right? Like, Van was able to go out there, he's able to knock him down and get a finish. Van has power for 125 pounds. Ulanbekov does too. How did Ulanbekov lose? It was a fight against Tim Elliott. Elliott was able to stuff his takedowns. Ulanbekov went 2 for 10, and Tim Elliott really brought it to him, and he was able to knock him down in the first round. He's able to take the second. Ulanbekov ended up winning the third. Again, Josh Van's got to do somewhat of the same thing. He's probably going to have to find a knockdown in this fight, and he's going to have to stuff a lot of takedowns out of Tagir Ulanbekov. The problem is Josh Van has really not fought anybody of the wrestling prowess of Ulanbekov, and Josh Van is still very young in his career. He is only 22 years old. But you know what? We are going with the underdog in this fight. We're taking Josh Van because Van seriously has the style. If you're picking a fighter to beat Tagir Ulanbekov, Josh Van has that type of style, it feels like. He's more than 10 years younger than Tagir Ulanbekov. But again, this is kind of the style of fight that you have to fight against Ulanbekov, is what Josh Van has, right? A guy who can stuff takedowns, a guy who is going to bring it to you, and a guy who has power as well. It, to a certain extent, is like Tim Elliott. And right, Ulanbekov's won fights, right? He beat Nate Maness in his 2 fights ago. He submitted him. He submitted Cody Durden in his last fight. And there's definitely a chance you can go out there and submit Josh Van as well. I'm willing to bank on the fact that Josh Van is going to make Tagir Ulanbekov stay on the back foot this entire fight. And Josh Van is able to push forward the entire fight and just give Ulanbekov hell. Because again, that's the type of stuff Josh Van can do to someone. Again, the guy's a young fighter. He's 3-0 in the UFC. His only loss ever came back in 2021 in his 3rd professional mixed martial arts fight. He's got a win over a one-time very hype prospect in Perez Moran, who is probably going to make his way in the UFC very soon. I would be surprised if we don't see him on the Contender Series after his fight against Freddie Rodriguez for the Fury FC Championship, expecting that he wins later this summer. Actually, that's today. Oh, I totally forgot. That's today. I forgot Fury fights on Sundays. I'm assuming by the time this video's out, we'll probably know who's won that fight. I'm assuming Perez Moran wins, and I think with that win, Perez Moran will end up on the Contender Series. But anyways, Josh Fan's got a win over him. He finished him in the second round. It was Moran's second loss at the time, and if Moran won that one, he was likely going to be the guy who's going to get the call of the UFC, similar to what Van did. I think Van wins. It's a tough pick. I would not be surprised in the slightest if Ulanbekov gets it. But give me Joshua Van to remain undefeated in the UFC. I'm going to take him to win this fight by unanimous decision. We move on to the welterweights. Josh Quinlan taking on Adam Fugitt. Two guys who are in desperate need of a win, right? Fugitt's 9-4, Quinlan 6-2. I'm a little bit surprised this is the one starting off the main card. At least that's what the UFC has it as for now. But I do get it at the same time because you're probably getting a knockout in this one. Someone's probably going out, right? Fugitt was submitted in his last fight by Mike Malott. He finished Yukashu Kinoshita in a fight before that, and then before that he got knocked out by Michael Morales. He got dropped a couple times in that fight. Fugitt doesn't have the best chin. Mike Malott did drop him as well. And for Josh Quinlan, well, this is a guy who just took so much damage just 3 or 4 months ago against Danny left-hand to God Barlow. Barlow's very good, and Josh Quinlan ate so much damage in that fight. So much damage. And now he's turning around that quickly. It's a little concerning. It truly is a little concerning. And both these guys really haven't beat a very good / capable UFC fighter yet. Right? Quinlan's win is Jason Witt. Adam Fugitt's win is Yukashu Kinoshita. Right? Kinoshita went 0-2 in the UFC. I don't know if he's going to get another shot. Josh Quinlan's beat Jason Witt, who is an aging veteran who's no longer fighting. Right? I don't think is fighting anymore, right? Quinlan's losses, Trey Waters, Danny Barlow, they're not bad losses at all. Don't get me wrong. I think both those guys are very solid, right? Trey Waters is 2-0 in the UFC coming off his decision win over Billy Goff. Again, Barlow's undefeated still. Not bad losses. Fugitt, though, not bad losses at all. Again, Michael Morales and Mike Malott are not horrible losses. And on top of that, winning in LFA before that to get into the UFC against the PFL name now in Solomon Renfro, where he knocked him out in 43 seconds, where again, like we were talking about with Josh Fan and Perez Moran, if Solomon Renfro won that fight, he'd be the guy getting the UFC contract. So, again, I'm really iffy on this pick because I really think it could go either way. I really think it could because both these guys have remained somewhat competitive against their opposition, but they have shown that they aren't the best against the guys that they've fought. I think this is a very evenly matched fight. I didn't realize Fugitt's 35 years old either. I think, again, on normal rest and normal recovery, I'd take Josh Quinlan. But the fact that he just took so much damage against Danny Barlow just less than 4 months ago and he just got knocked out really concerns me on this pick, and I'm going to take the slight underdog in this fight and Adam Fugitt. We're taking Fugitt to win the fight by knockout, and we're taking him to do it in the second round. Again, I'm thinking an accumulation of damage, and I'm also thinking, again, Josh Quinlan shouldn't be fighting this quickly. He just shouldn't. He should not be fighting this quickly after getting knocked out by a dangerous guy in Barlow. Fugitt does hit hard too. Again, you look at the win against Kinoshita. I understand that was him getting the fight on the ground. He was a pretty big underdog in that fight. He did get the takedown. And he was able to ground Kinoshita and get the finish down there. But that's another factor of this fight that I haven't even talked about. Fugitt could go in there and wrestle. And he could be very successful in wrestling in this fight as well. So, again, I think we have more pathways to victory in picking Fugitt than we will with Quinlan. I like his wrestling, and I also like the fact that, again, Quinlan just got knocked out, and Fugitt should be able to at least put some power into Quinlan and wobble him, rock him, and potentially knock him out. So I'm going to take Adam Fugitt to win the fight. We are taking him to take this one by second round knockout. Again, if this was a fight on normal recovery for both guys, yeah, I'm going to be honest, I'd take Josh Quinlan. I think overall he's the better fighter, but when you look at everything involved going into this fight, especially with Quinlan just losing and getting knocked out and taking all that damage, yeah, I'm going to take Fugitt to take it. So give me Adam Fugitt to win the fight by second round knockout. We're going back to the flyweight division yet again with another fight that, we've had some of these on this card. It feels like not a foregone conclusion, but it feels like an easy one to pick, right? You've got the fighter out of Kazakhstan, Asu Almabaev, who is a very small flyweight. He's 5'4", right? Taking on Jose Johnson, who's 6 feet tall and who fights at 125 pounds. He's going to have a 7-inch reach advantage. He's going to be a lot bigger than Asu Almabaev in this fight. The problem for Jose Johnson is Almabaev's going to be looking to take this fight down at all points of the fight. And that's something that should concern Jose Johnson because, again, Johnson's been submitted 4 times before in his professional mixed martial arts career. Again, where Johnson usually gets things done is on the feet. Okay, and I understand his last fight against Chad Anheliger, it wasn't that. He did submit Anheliger, but what happened? Anheliger was able to take him down 4 times in that fight. Jose Johnson was the one seeing the success on the feet. It was just, again, Johnson got the submission very late in the fight, in a fight that he was probably already going to win anyway, but still, again, he found the finish very late in it. And Anheliger, again, was going for broke, and he just lost it in the 3rd round, right? He was probably on his way to lose it anyway, but he's trying to find any possible way possible to get a finish. Okay. But that's still a problem if Chad Anheliger is able to take him down that many times. Because Almabaev is a very good wrestler. He is. This guy is 19-2 as a professional. He has not lost a fight since 2017, and he's been on a damn run, right? The wins in the UFC so far are Ode Osborne and CJ Vergara. Again, I just don't like the matchup at all for Jose Johnson. This is a guy who's 16-8. He's lost 8 times out of 24 so far in his professional mixed martial arts career. He finds himself at a plus 320 dog in this fight against a guy who has not lost in about 15 professional fights, who's a minus 420 favorite. He's from Kazakhstan. There's another just added bonus. This is difficult for Jose Johnson. Just considering the circumstances and considering the way he has fought before in the past and the ways that guys have been able to beat him, again, this is really troubling. Again, you're going to be hard-pressed to find someone who wouldn't take Almabaev in this fight. Look at what this guy's done so far in the UFC. Look at who he's beat. Again, you may think different things about Ode and CJ Vergara, but just look at the ways he beat both those guys. Again, it is dominant performances. Vergara really couldn't get anything going in that fight. He takes Ode Osborne down and limits him the entire 8 minutes that fight did go on, right? And then, again, when you compare Vergara and Osborne to Jose Johnson, those guys are probably better than Jose Johnson. He just beat Chad Anheliger. Yes, he beat Jack Cartwright in the Contender Series. That is a very good victory that was not supposed to happen. But other than Cartwright and other than that upset victory against Mo Miller, really, what are we looking at here? He lost by Twister in the first round to Damone Blackshear, right? Remember when Blackshear had all that hype around him for about 2 weeks until he lost to Mario Bautista on pay-per-view in a fight that he probably won? Anyways, that's besides the point, but right, like, he got submitted very quickly by Blackshear. He's been submitted before multiple times. There's been many guys who have been able to submit Jose Johnson. Who's to say Almabaev, who is a guy who, again, he specializes in that. Who's to say he's not going to be able to submit Jose Johnson? He's definitely going to. We're going to take Almabaev to remain undefeated in the UFC and submit Jose Johnson in the first round again. Give me Almabaev to win by first round sub. Okay, next up in the bantamweight division, we have got Miles Johns taking on Douglas Silva de Andrade. It's a very good fight, a very underrated fight on this card. Now, again, we talked about it earlier. I don't know how this is under the next fight in terms of the order of this card. We'll talk about Lucas Almeida and Timmy Cuamba coming up after this one. But for Douglas Silva de Andrade, or D Silva, right, this is a guy who's 29-5 professionally. He's 7-5 in the UFC, but this is a guy who hits very hard. And he has been around for a while. Yeah, he is 38 years old, but he hits hard, and he's fought some very good fighters. And really, it has been somewhat of a career resurgence recently for him, winning 3 of his last 4, wins over Gaetano Perello, Sergey Morozov in a huge upset victory, a loss to Said Nurmagomedov, and then most recently a unanimous decision victory over Cody Stamann about 13 months ago. He now gets Miles Johns, who has been on a run in his own right, beating Cody Gibson, beating Vince Morales. Johns has been on a run too, and these are 2 guys who hit hard, right? I mean, both these guys have the knockout capability. Obviously, I think you see it more out of D Silva, but I mean, I would say honestly, because of D Silva's 20 knockout victories in his entire professional MMA career. But recently, again, both these guys have found different ways to win fights, whether it be by decision, whether it be by submission, like D Silva did against Morozov. But you always, going into a fight against D Silva, always have to worry about the power. Again, before he ended up submitting Morozov, he knocked him down 3 times in that fight. He did get dropped by Cody Stamann over Charlotte in May of 2023, but he still ended up winning that fight. But again, it's always something you have to worry about with Douglas Silva de Andrade. It is that power that he does possess. Same can be said about Miles Johns as well. He has not gotten a knockdown, though, since that Anderson Dos Santos fight, but Johns does have the power in his back pocket, too. It's just a matter of if we see it or not. And that's why when you look at this fight from a striking perspective, I do like Douglas Silva de Andrade a little bit better than Miles Johns, just because of the power that he has. Just because, again, both these guys have it, but we just see it more often, and, we see it being put out there more by Douglas Silva de Andrade, who is going to be turning 39 next week. This is not a young fighter by any stretch of the imagination, but this is a guy who has still looked very good despite the age that he is at right now. And I don't feel great about picking Johns in this spot. Again, he beat Cody Gibson in his last one, but again, that feels like a fight that he's supposed to win. Gibson's 1-5 in the UFC. Vince Morales, I mean, again, Morales is 3-5 in the UFC as well. It's a real step up in competition. I understand Johns is 5-2 in the UFC, but look at the wins compared to the losses. No disrespect to any of these guys, but Cole Smith, Kevin Natividad, Anderson Dos Santos, Vince Morales, Cody Gibson are the wins. The losses are Mario Bautista, John Castaneda. Compared to the wins Douglas Silva de Andrade has in the UFC, Cody Stamann, Sergey Morozov, Gaetano Perello, and Renan Barão was old. Marlon Chito Vera back in 2018, right? He's fought better guys, lost to better guys as well. Font, Jan, Leron Murphy, and Said Nurmagomedov. Yeah, everything for me in this fight points to a Douglas Silva de Andrade victory. I don't think he gets Miles Johns out of there, but I do think, again, the power is going to impact this fight enough to the point where D Silva is able to win it by unanimous decision. So give me, again, who I believe is the slight favorite going into this one. Yes, Douglas Silva de Andrade to beat Miles Johns by unanimous decision. On to our next one. Again, I don't understand the placement of this fight on this card. Lucas Almeida taking on Timmy Cuamba in this fight. I get it. Timmy had a very close fight in his last one against Balaji Oki, right? He loses the fight by split decision. He takes it on somewhat short notice. It's a closer fight than a lot of people thought it was going to be, but he still loses, right? He's 0-1 in the UFC, taking on Lucas Almeida, who's 1-2 in the UFC, who has not won a fight since his UFC debut back in 2022 for Michael Trezano, and then he dropped 2 fights back-to-back to Pat Sabatini by submission, and then by Andre Touchy-Feely by knockout in the first round. That was about 6 months ago now to the point. But Almeida hasn't been the greatest. He's been 1-2. He's been just simply dominated in his last 2 fights. He looked good in the Trezano fight, don't get me wrong. That was a very impressive performance out of Almeida. But the losses to Sabatini and Feely were really one-way traffic. And now you get a guy against him in Timmy Cuamba, who I don't think is necessarily the greatest fighter. But again, he has a win over Mateo Vogel on the Contender Series. Vogel is all right. He's won a fight since losing in the Contender. He beat Michael Stack on Tough Enough, who was 7-2 at the time. Okay, and the Balaji Oki loss, again, he put out a decent performance in that fight against Oki. I didn't think it warranted the split decision, but again, he fought well enough in that fight to at least get it to the point where it was a split decision. Now you get him and Almeida. I think personally he beats Almeida. I think he's got more skills to win this fight. Almeida simply just hasn't looked good recently, right? Cuamba has shown that he can strike, he can grapple, he can do it all if he needs to. And Almeida has been beat in both aspects recently in the UFC. Sabatini submitted him and he was able to take him down and hold him down. And Andre Feely was able to outstrike him and knock him out in the first round. Any pathway really, puts itself out there for Timmy Twilight Cuamba to win this fight. I am not still sold on the guy. Again, he hasn't fought the greatest of guys outside the UFC. He's 0-1 in the UFC. And he's getting a very interesting promotional push by being put in the spot as the featured bout on this main card at Apex 100. Again, there's a reason we were celebrating earlier for Apex 100. But yeah, I don't understand the spot of this fight, but I understand, I think, what should happen, and that should be a Timmy Cuamba victory. We're going to take him to win the fight by unanimous decision. I think he's just better than Almeida everywhere. I think his best pathway to victory is on the feet, too. Again, on the ground, I think it's a little sketchy. And yes, Almeida can strike, but Cuamba is really not known for that entirely. It's going to be a striking game that's going to win him this fight. I think he goes out there and just purely outstrikes Almeida to victory. And I'm going to take Timmy Cuamba to win the fight by decision. Again, it's a weird spot in this card for this fight, but I do think Cuamba is all around the better striker. So we're going to take him to win this one by unanimous decision. On to the co-main event. Ikram Aliskerov versus Antonio Trocoli. Trocoli is back again. Now, we will talk, before we talk about Ikram Aliskerov, let's talk about Antonio Trocoli and the fact that he is now again in a spot to fight in the UFC. It's the 3rd time this has happened. And I did not think this guy was going to ever get a shot in the UFC. It's weird, okay? Let's talk about it. There's red flags right off the bat with Trocoli. I'm not calling him God, what was that one guy from the Ukraine? The guy who lost to Menefield. I'm blanking on his name right now. I'm not calling him a fraud like that guy. But I'm saying there's a lot of red flags when you look at the resume and what Antonio Trocoli has been in his professional mixed martial arts career. Okay, let's look back at 2016. And first off, Trocoli has lost 3 of 6 going into this fight. He's won 3 of 6 as well, and won the last 3, but still. Go back to 2016, 3 fights in a row, losses. Jacob Volkman loses by unanimous decision in Legacy, right? Volkman is a guy who fought in the UFC a long time ago. He's able to go out there and beat Trocoli. Diego Lima beat him by unanimous decision. That was before Lima, again, made his way into the UFC. Okay, then we look at, I think, that's in between runs, I think, for Lima. I think it was. It was. It was in between UFC runs for Lima, but still, lose to Lima. Fights Marcelo Barbosa. Can't make it off the stool at the end of the second round. Barbosa, unlike the previous 2 names, really isn't that well known of a guy. Okay, what does he do? He goes on, he wins a fight by unanimous decision in 2018 against a guy who's 21-13. He beats a guy who's 2-6. He wins on the Contender Series. He gets popped for performance-enhancing drugs against Kenneth Berg. He beats him, right? But then it's booked again, which is odd enough, outside the UFC in Superior Challenge 22 in a fight card located in Sweden. It's booked again, even though he beat Berg the first time but was popped. That's 2 years later. The fight doesn't happen. Then he fights in Brazilian Fighting Series against Wesley Asael. He loses the fight by rear naked choke in the first round. Okay. All that aside, he's booked to fight at UFC 282 against Ovince St. Preux. He withdraws. 2 years later, he's booked against Omar Sy. Just a month ago, he withdraws from the fight. And now here we are against Ikram Aliskerov, which is by far the toughest possible matchup he could draw. Because Ikram Aliskerov is a dog. This guy is very difficult to beat. So difficult. And the only guy to do it is Khamzat Chimaev back in 2019. Khamzat knocked him out. Since then, the guy has not lost a fight. He's legit. Now, I would have liked to see him fight better competition so far in his UFC run, because he came into the UFC, beats Mario Sosa on the Contender Series, good win. Then he knocks out Phil Hawes, who obviously doesn't have a chin. He's booked against Paulo Costa. Costa gets rebooked. They both get rebooked. Costa gets rebooked to Luke Rockhold, and Ikram Aliskerov got rebooked against Nasruddin Imavov. Imavov pulls out of the fight against Aliskerov, and now he fights Warley Alves instead. He beats Warley Alves like he's supposed to. He's booked then against Anthony Hernandez at UFC 298. He withdraws. Then he was supposed to get Andrea Muniz on this card. Muniz withdraws. And now we get him and Antonio Trocoli. It's weird. Because, yeah, Aliskerov is a lot of hype. And, yeah, he's a minus 900 favorite in this fight. And 99% of voters on Tapology are picking him to win this fight. And I'm picking him to win the fight by first round knockout. But we still have not seen him against guys he should be fighting in the UFC. Because it's weird too, because at one point in time, the UFC was giving him very credible opponents. Costa and Imavov. In both of those fights, it wasn't Aliskerov's fault that the fight didn't happen. Now, he had to withdraw from the Hernandez fight, but that's only once. It's weird. But again, if you're Aliskerov, why not take the fight? He's going to beat Trocoli. It's because Trocoli's not very good. And it is odd because why is he even in this spot at all? Again, he's not going to be on performance-enhancing drugs like he's been outside the UFC and even on the Contender Series. Like, look at his picture right here. This is Trocoli on the Contender Series. Tell me that guy's not on anything. Just look at the guy. He's got to be on something, right? In that picture, he looks like he is. That was, what, 4 years ago he fought in the Contender Series? Seriously. Yeah, 2019, he fought in the Contender Series. That's 5 years ago now. And now he's finally making his UFC debut 5 years after he won the Contender, but he got popped, obviously. It just doesn't make sense. It feels like they're kind of just throwing Aliskerov at him because they know Aliskerov's going to beat him, and they can just say, all right, we're done with you after Aliskerov beats him. But it's just weird because he's been booked so many times. I don't understand. Nothing makes sense. And he's fought nothing but cans outside the UFC, and when he has not fought cans, he's beat them. So, I mean, obviously, like, he should, but it's so confusing. Aliskerov's going to win, though. I mean, again, there's not much else we can say about this fight. Aliskerov's a way better fighter. I do find it interesting, though. Trocoli's been booked multiple times at 205 pounds. The Ovince St. Preux fight, the Umar Sy fight, even when he fought in the Contender Series, he's been booked at 205 pounds. He's fighting Aliskerov at 185. And the guy's 6'5". He's massive. I don't know how he gets down there. Even if he does get down there, he is going to be a shell of what he was at 205. He's going to be bare bones, and he's going to be very chinny. Aliskerov beats him easily. Give me Ikram Aliskerov to win the fight by first round knockout. As we go on to the main event, again, back in the flyweight division, we've got Alex Perez taking on Tatsuro Taira. Now, I was very down on Alex Perez going into his last fight in the main event against Mateus Nicolau. I'll be honest with you, I'm not afraid to say when I was wrong about a fight. I picked Mateus Nicolau to beat him. I think a lot of people picked Nicolau to beat him because, again, Alex Perez was somewhat of an unknown. And now we know about Nicolau. The chin's completely gone. You can't trust that guy to win a fight ever, it feels like now. But Perez, again, yeah, he fought Muhammad Mokaev close, but he lost. But before that, right, I lost to Pantoja, lost to Figueiredo. But now when you look back at it, right, those three guys, Figueiredo, Pantoja, Mokaev, obviously the Figueiredo fight was for a championship. Pantoja ended up becoming a champion. They're not the worst losses now. They really don't feel like it. We'll see what happens when Mokaev fights Manel Kopp in England. We will see what happens with that. But Alex Perez beats Mateus Nicolau and looks good in doing so. He knocks him out in his second UFC main event, right? Again, how much is that Alex Perez and how much is that Mateus Nicolau's chin being gone? I think it's a combination of both. But now he gets a very tough guy in Tatsuro Taira, who, though, has not gotten that step up in competition until right now. Tatsuro Taira has fought nothing but unknown, unranked UFC flyweights. And now here he is against Alex Perez, who is a good wrestler, who hits hard, and is just a very tough guy to beat. I would say he's the gatekeeper to the top 7 of the weight class. Truly, right? Taira's ranked because he's built his ranking off of unranked guys. Who has Tatsuro Taira beat? Truly, it's nobody, right? Carlos Candelario, CJ Vergara, Jesus Aguilar, Edgar Chairez, Carlos Fernandes. They have been very careful in booking Taira up until this point, to the point where he is now the 13th ranked flyweight in the world, taking on the number 5 flyweight in the world, Alex Perez. Again, Tatsuro Taira is going to get a huge boost if he wins this one. I think he'll likely find himself in a fight with someone along the lines of Kai Kara France, Amir Albazi, or Brandon Moreno with the win. Right? Probably not Albazi, because I think Albazi's going to fight Royval. He, I think, could easily find himself in a fight with Kai Kara France if he wins this fight. The winner of this fight, I think, will fight Kai Kara France regardless. But it's a huge step up in competition. It is a massive step up. Because, again, you go from fighting Carlos Fernandes in your last fight to Alex Perez. Tatsuro Taira got dropped by Edgar Chairez, don't forget that. But how does he win fights? His striking is ever evolving, but he overwhelms guys on the ground. That's what Taira does. He is going to swarm you on the ground and straight just give you hell. And I feel like that's what he's going to do to a certain extent to Perez. Similar to Josh Van, that's why I kind of wanted to see the Taira Josh Van fight. He's a young guy, he's 24 years old. He's still, again, evolving as a fighter. But I think he does beat Perez. It's just a matter of if he gets the submission or not. I think Taira does, because Perez has been submitted 5 times in his career. He is 25-8. He's been beat a lot, right? He's been beat 4 times in the UFC, given to very good guys: Joe Benavidez, Davison Figueiredo, Alexandre Pantoja, and Muhammad Mokaev. But he's been submitted against Pantoja, Figueiredo. He lost a couple times outside the UFC by submission as well. He's not an unsubmittable guy. And that's what I think ultimately Tatsuro Taira will do to him. I think it's going to take a while, but I think Taira outscrambles him on the ground. You saw the Nicolau fight. There was no ground game in that fight. And that's where we thought Nicolau had his best advantage to win, was with his jiu-jitsu. The fight never went down there. Taira's not chinny like like Nicolau is. And I think he's able to keep his own on the feet better than what Nicolau did. I'm not saying Taira is going to beat Perez in a stand-up fight, because ultimately I don't think he does that. I don't think he's able to beat Alex Perez in a striking fight, but I do think he's able to grapple. I do think he's able to wrestle, and I think he's able to give Perez a lot of fits on the ground because of how Tatsuro Taira is just able to mix the fight up and, again, implement his wrestling game. So that's why the pick for me is Tatsuro Taira by 3rd round submission, because, again, Nicolau didn't engage in a grappling or a wrestling fight at all with Perez, unlike the previous guys who have beat him. Figueiredo, Pantoja, Mokaev, all those fights have hit the ground. Nicolau just didn't do that. Tatsuro Taira is not stupid. He knows this is his best pathway to victory, and he's got to take advantage of it. So that's what he should do, and I think that's what he will do. I'm taking Tatsuro Taira, who's only 24 years old. He feels like the UFC's new Japanese star, but I think he goes out there and wins the fight, and he wins in the main event here of UFC Apex number 100. We are going with Tatsuro Taira to win the fight by first round submission. Third round submission, excuse me. I think it's going to take a little bit. It's all a matter of him finding that takedown, and once he lands it, he should be able to go back to the well over and over again. I think Taira does get it done. I'm going to take him to win the fight again by third round sub, doing something Nicolau didn't even try to do. I don't think Perez is going to have that one punch knockout power like he did against Nicolau. I think that's more again of Nicolau's chin than Perez. Not to say Perez isn't hit hard, but I think Taira is able to walk through some of those shots and just keep it pushing. So give me Tatsuro Taira again to win in this main event by third round submission. And folks, thank y'all for watching our UFC Apex number 100 predictions here on the channel with Alex Perez and Tatsuro Taira in the main event. We will be back next week for another UFC fight night or UFC card and predictions here on the channel. And you know what's next? It's not Conor McGregor yet, though. It is UFC Saudi Arabia, though. A very good card with Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev in the main event. And tomorrow we will have our PFL 4 predictions here on the channel as well, with the women's flyweights and with the heavyweights as well. So stay tuned to the channel for that, folks, coming out tomorrow. And hit that like button down below if you did enjoy the video. Make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more as well. And also make sure to comment if you do disagree with any of the picks. Folks, thank you all for watching, and Mamba forever.